I'm Dorothy Rowe, and I'm here with Andrew Hewson. And it is a great pleasure for both of us to present a series of talks on various topics that present an opportunity to explore the deep mechanics of consciousness and how the deep mechanics of consciousness, um, self-interacting dynamics of consciousness, fold in on their own nature and give rise to the incredible diversity and amazing expression of this world that we live in. It's really a never-ending source of fascination. And we decided to get together and do this because Andrew and I have levels of great similarity of perspective, and we also have areas of diversity of the way we express. And as a result, we thought it would be kind of interesting to see how the dynamics of both of our perspectives come together to present for you, all of you, in YouTube land, all of you on the internet. I can do that again. So to present to everybody, to all of you who come to join us, this, our perspective, to provide a really big, broad picture of what we're dealing with. This is such an important transitional time in human history. And it's wonderful to be at the front of this wave of understanding. So tonight, one of our topic is energy healing and the collective, and transformation on a collective level of creation. And we want to go deep into the mechanics of how that works and why that works and what's the nitty gritty of it, because it's such an exciting topic. And it really feels like it's the wave of, for me as an energy healer, it feels like the wave of the future when it comes to energy healing, that, you know, we can do healing for ourselves, or a healer can sit with a client and do energy healing work. But when we get together as a community and we do this work together, it's really powerful, and big, big, beautiful, important changes can be made to support a brighter future for everyone. So thanks a lot for joining us. And we're just going to dive in, and we don't have like a outline or anything like that. We're just going to discuss this topic of the group dynamics of the evolution of consciousness. And we're so happy that you've come to join us and participate. All right, Andrew, you can talk for a little bit.
Okay.
And we'll go through and edit. We can do little.
Yeah, for sure. No worries.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Dorothy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you,
It's good to be here.
discussing these types of things, so very relevant in our current times. Yeah, I felt like it would be helpful just to go over what collective healing is and its relevancy. There's certainly many things that are being spoken about these days in the spiritual marketplace, and various perspectives on the value of healing, what that looks like, and how that is approached. From your perspective, it's approached on purely an energetic level, on the level of pure being, pure consciousness,
Yeah.
and perceiving the inner mechanics of what is taking place in those layers that are the subtle to gross expression of conscious awareness experiencing itself.
Yeah, Andrew, my experience is that just the act of placing the attention on that
Mm.
has a healing and transformational effect.
Definitely. Yes. The attention itself has the potential to be healing, but it also has the potential to be sort of re-impressing. So I think that's a great place to
Oh, wow, that's
start.
a really good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And if we look at, I think everyone is these days is familiar with the observation principle in quantum physics, which recognizes that just by merely observing something or placing attention on something, the way in which that configures in our perception is altered.
Right.
So
The
this
Heisenberg
reveals,
uncertainty principle.
there you go. Yeah. It reveals a very important understanding, and it's kind of a link between this type of spiritual work, if you will, and the scientific field. And I'm sure there's
Absolutely.
much more there that I'm not aware of. I don't consider
There's
myself
so much. There's
a
so much.
scientist.
I wish the physicists weren't such shy personalities, because it would be lovely to get some of them in here. But
Yeah.
you know, I've been
Maybe one
saying,
day we will.
I know I've been trying to get them in, and they're like, "Oh no, I don't do cameras." But those are the greatest guys, right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. 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 So with that understanding, we can see that what you say about attention is definitely true. And we can also see that if our attention is moving in the direction of resistance or pushing something away or trying to change it from a space of feeling like it's wrong or bad, then that's also going to have some degree of potency in the way experience is showing up. And it's not really going to be moving in the direction of harmony. So when we look at healing, we're looking at greater harmony. We're looking at the possibility of greater coherency, a greater expression of the innate intelligence of conscious awareness itself. And when the attention is supported by an intention of healing and transcendence and resolution, then it has a whole different qualitative output, if you will, than if it is coming from fear or stress or anger, so on and so forth. This just shows us that the way in which we are holding something, the way in which we are seeing something is very, very important. It's very powerful. So it's not necessarily the thing itself that comes up, but the way in which we are with what is arising, the way in which the attention is being placed on it.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, could you say that the foundation for the way we hold a particular topic with our awareness would be how we hold ourselves?
Mm,
Is it possible that part of that story is coming back to oneself and that sense of who am I? Who am I that holds this? And how do I interact with myself? Because my experience with all this is that it's really the source of creation self-interacting. Like
mhm,
all this reality is that one immutable, quality-less, unbounded field of absolute being, which is self-interacting. And in the folds of that self-interaction, layers upon layers, diversity emerges. And
mhm.
so the first layer of that is a layer of how do I hold myself? How does the self hold itself?
Yes, that
And
is.
yeah, I was going to say, and then from there, based on how I self interact,
Mm,
I create patterns for interacting with my environment, because the other side of that picture is that the larger environment really is our larger body. That we
mm,
think, oh, this is my body. It has a head and the arms and the legs and the torso. But this is the antenna of my body. My body is the whole immense universe.
mm.
And I have this antenna. The universe has many antennas, right? It's got
Yeah.
many antennas. And each one of us is an antenna. And we're each looking out at the universe and understanding ourselves. We're understanding the divinity is understanding its larger nature through each one of us. And
Mm.
so what I think of myself and how I feel about myself, and do I love myself or do I respect or protect or honor, will have sort of a subliminal influence on how we interact with the rest of creation, because it's all being, it's all life. As an example, the other day I was cutting up it was a piece of ginger, I think. I was cutting up a piece of ginger to go in some food. And I picked up this piece of ginger and I realized it's alive. It's alive. And just like I know that I'm holding this ginger in my hand, the ginger knows that I'm holding it.
Mm.
And at that moment, the ginger's like, she's holding me because the ginger is alive. It knows. It's just like if you dig it out of the ground, it knows, hey, I've been dug out of the ground. Right. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with that kind of that cyclic, you use the word resolution. I like that resolution where that, that kind of cycling and recycling of all the parts and bits of creation, even our own bodies eventually recycle and so forth. But so there's nothing wrong. It's not like, oh, I can't eat ginger because it knows that I'm going to cut it up and eat it. No, it's fine. But because that's just the way it is with food.
Mhm.
But there's that awareness that we had a relationship, that we were in a exchange with each other
Mm.
at that moment, even though one level of perception was extremely simple and
Mm.
mine is like more complex, and I have language and I have hands and I have all that, but it doesn't mean that any part of creation is not aware. It's all the parts are aware. Even the air, if I go like that, the air knows, the air feels it too, like
Mm.
it's a constant massaging. It's a massaging, consciousness is massaging itself from every angle.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. That's I think what you're saying about the ourself being primary is absolutely true and important. It's that old saying, "As within, so without," and "As above, so below." In this context, I think that it's also important to recognize that this doesn't mean that we have to be at a certain stage of awareness or a certain degree of realization, or else it would just be kind of waiting around for that to happen before we could begin to witness a different way of life unfolding. So the possibility is that through grace we can begin to hold experience differently, irrespective of what we have recognized reality to be. And we can also see that the way in which we're holding experience will oftentimes correlate with a higher recognition of reality. So it's supportive of going beyond our current understanding of ourselves. And it uh, has the potential to also change the way that we see the supposed out there-ness of the world, as you were saying.
I love that point because I feel as if anybody who gets that, so for our listening audience, if you understand what Andrew just said, it was abstract, but it was so beautiful that it empowers every person. Doesn't matter what level of consciousness you're at, but it empowers you to know that just by shifting the perspective a bit, one can upgrade the level of successful interaction with the environment. And
Mm,
anybody can do it. It's not, there's no monopoly, there's no restrictions. It's not like, oh, you have to have been meditating for 40 years or something. You can just knowing,
mm,
knowing that that's an option suddenly makes it accessible.
mm.
It's beautiful. Thank you. It's like such a gift that you just gave everybody, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. That it is a very beautiful thing. Um,
So, how would we describe what that shift might be? I mean, I realize each person's coming from a slightly different angle, like
mhm,
all the folks who are listening to us talk today.
mhm,
Each person's got their own unique environment in which they live and their unique family situations and their jobs and all that, and their unique relationship with themselves.
mm,
But I'm wondering if the shift is, if we could say that this shift has a sort of a universal value to it that
mhm,
would be applicable to anybody, regardless of
mhm. Yeah.
their positioning. Would you think?
So,
I mean, I don't know.
yeah, I would just say that it's the tendency and the movement of the conditioned mind is to be focused on what seems to be going on outside of itself.
Mm,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think that the most basic understanding of the shift is to become more alert to the way that you're seeing the world and the way that the world is being processed and what's arising in you
Yeah.
in reference to what's being reflected back through the world.
Mm,
To become more interested in that than what seems to be going on out there. And when we're talking about collective healing, this is so relevant because many people take the concept of collective healing and then it becomes a thing to fix out there, right? To
right.
fix out there, because out there's what needs fixing. And I see the way that it should be, and I need to fix out there. Well, that's not very helpful at all. And it's really missing the mark as far as what collective healing has the potential to be, because this is a walking universe here that we know as the human body. So the collective is just this. It's not the out there-ness of what seems to be going on. And whatever light shines forth in here automatically translates into the whole field of activity.
Right. Right. I
So if
agree.
I'm wasting my time really just focusing in on everything that I see to be wrong out there and judging it and criticizing it and labeling it and wanting it to be different, then think about how much uh, how much more valuable it would be to see that that's going on, to see that there's judgment going on, to see that there is a wanting something to be different and a criticizing, and to be willing to examine that and to release the movements that are present there.
That's beautiful. Yeah, my experience is that anytime any aspect of ourself comes under the focus of our awareness,
Mm.
that awareness just spontaneously and naturally brings the resolution for that thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just almost effortless, kind of
Mm-hmm.
spontaneous. But your point ties in so beautifully with this thought that I was having earlier about how this is you were saying like the walking universe, like this is the point of perspective on the universe. But if the awareness turns more inward and we look at not so much focusing on the problem or the details of the problem or the symptoms, you could
Mm-hmm.
say, but more on what's happening internally, what I found was that there are precise correlations
Mm-hmm.
between all the sort of inner landscape of my consciousness and
Mm-hmm.
all the external. See my shadow?
Yeah, I can see it.
So there's the direct correlations between
Yeah.
my internal structure and the external structure in the environment. And so,
Yeah, they're like shadows,
yeah,
blockages in the light.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So if there's something out there that
Yeah.
I'm not pleased with, I know that what I have to do is I have to move
Right.
what I've got going on, right? And as I move that, what happens is, and I think you just brought up this point, that what happens is it has a reflective effect in the environment. Is that what you said? Sometimes you
Yeah.
say things so eloquently, and I'm like, what did he say exactly?
Yeah, no, I look at, basically what seems to be going on out there is a reflection of what's going on in the in-here-ness of
Yes,
our conscious
yes. And it happens
experiencing.
here first.
Yeah,
First it
exactly.
happens there,
So
then it
we look
reflects.
at the world and we say, wow, look at this mess and look at what's going, you know, it's easy to do. And that's a little bit more comfortable to sit on the couch and say, golly, look at what's going on out there.
Right.
But you could be looking on the couch and saying, hey, well, look at what's going on in here. A lot of this is just unconscious material, that's being projected because we're saying to ourselves, hey, look at this, you're not seeing this. So it'll just keep coming up into the field of activity until maybe you see. And then when we try to fix the field of activity, in what we feel is this external environment, nothing really changes because we just end up with more layering, more layering, more layering.
Right.
Because the fundamental issue has not been addressed.
Right.
And so through being open and willing to really examine the inner landscape and look at all of these things within our experience which really have been deemed to be unspiritual a lot of the time, and are not always so friendly to encounter, then what begins to take place is that we stop seeing so much unfriendliness out there because we have encountered that within our own experience. We've been willing to really look at what has been karmically inherited within this human lifetime. And through that looking and through that allowing and through that attentive massaging, what begins to take place is that there's release and there's resolution and there's completion and more and more and more and more. And that correlates with the way in which conscious awareness sees itself as the environment. So what we find is the environment starts to change as well. But
Right.
is it really the environment that's changing? That's the question. It's not. It's us that has changed, and us being the only one that there actually is. That starts to show up in the way that life is experiencing itself.
So I'm thinking about that's beautiful. Yeah, makes sense. It's reflecting the outer reflects the inner.
Hmm.
Um, I'm thinking about how this translates because what you've described is perfect for the individual, but how does it translate when it's like a group, like a big group of people?
Mm-hmm.
And one of my thoughts is that my inner landscape and your inner landscape and all of our inner landscape together has it has the let's see I would say they're laws of nature that govern the way the field or the ocean of consciousness expresses itself at different levels of density. So at the grossest, densest level of consciousness, there's some very specific differences, like my microphone's like right there.
Mm-hmm.
For you, your microphone's in a slightly different position, and the people who are watching this might not even have microphones up, right? So at the gross level, my world has a sort of shape that's sort of unique for me.
Mm-hmm.
But as we go into the deeper levels of consciousness, what I've found is that the deeper field of consciousness is more abstract, less highly defined, and it's also shared collectively. Like there's more commonality. There's actually more commonality shared. For instance, we could say that this microphone is at the physical material level of creation, but just one layer deeper than that is the etheric level, and that is, by my estimation, the level of the dreamscape,
Mm-hmm.
like all of our dreams. And I noticed years ago, based on lucid experiences in dreaming, that we actually share levels of reality in dream and sleep state. They're places that we commonly go. And it's so interesting how time is so pliable at that level of consciousness that I can go back in time and interact with, say, my mother when I was 3 years old, but I, as an adult, can go back and be part of her dream, like back in the 1960s, something like that. Like there's a certain, like I said, the laws of nature differ a little bit from the denser levels down to the finer levels, and so it opens. I would say there are like more possibilities. There's more you can do as far as sort of intimate coordination of
Mm.
intention at the finer levels of
Yeah.
consciousness.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And in the work that you're doing, when there's the support for that to take place, and there's a vehicle for the refined perception to be utilized in that direction, and everyone has that same basic intention and tunes in to the same willingness to explore and open into whatever is provided and is karmically appropriate, then
Mhm.
that's what we're going to see take place is those more universal values of the layering of creation are going to be able to be shifted in the direction of its translation into the whole
Right, right.
field of activity. One thing I do think is important to note in that though is that it's only if the karma is open to that really being shifted. So nothing will be forced. Nothing will be forced unless there's a willingness, and that's a huge subject. But to the degree that the entirety of humanity is open and willing, then they will receive what is taking place in that. Mm,
Yeah, there's an individual principle, but I think it could probably be applied to the collective as well.
mm,
It's an old Vedic principle that when the karma is paid, the cure comes.
mm, mm,
So, for instance, we've been in the COVID pandemic for some
mm,
time. And of course, with all my heart, if I could just whoop, make it go away, if I could just vaporize that COVID,
mm,
I absolutely would do it. But that, along with some of the other heat related challenges that we've been facing over the last year,
mm,
throughout 2020, are connected to what I perceive as a very large collective lesson.
mm.
And that's a lesson in how do we deal with anger?
Yeah.
How do we deal with heat? The COVID brings up a fever. The fires in California and all through the West, and Colorado have been terrible. That's also fire. And of course, the protests and the riots and all that, which continue as well. Eh, all of these issues are representing, or they're providing, I'd say, facets of perception or perspective on the way that we have traditionally dealt with heat,
Mm,
excess heat, or heat that's misplaced, we could say, throughout the history of humanity. Because this is a huge lesson. This is a lesson that as a collective, we've never really fully mastered. I mean, if you look back 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, you can say, oh, wow, humanity's come so far. Look at
mm,
all these amazing areas that we've become proficient and we've mastered. But dealing really effectively with anger, some of the darker energies, that just hasn't happened yet. So if you look at it, COVID represents taking the anger and stuffing it inside, and I'm not going to tell, it's just going to implode inside my body. And so it
mhm,
becomes a fever inside the body, and it has its destructive effect there. And the fires are, I'm, I'm just, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to let the environment take care of it. I'm just going to avoid it if at all possible. And so then it comes out in the environment, and then, it's difficult. People's lives are upset through
mm,
that. And then the whole, well, I'm going to go out into the streets and I'm going to protest and I'm going to express my anger. I'm going to show people what's going on and how I feel about everything. That's the sort of like you were saying earlier, that's that idea of sort of like blaming some environment, like thinking I can machinations on the environment. I can force it. I can
mhm,
force a shift that I want to
mhm,
see. But look, hundreds and hundreds of days of protests, and has it changed anything? Oh,
mhm,
hundreds of years of protest. So it's as if, as a collective, we are being asked, we are being shown the three different ways that we handle that particular very destructive energy. And we're being shown that none of them actually work.
mm,
And being asked to draw upon that infinite resource of intelligence and creativity within ourselves to find a new solution to these problems. And of course, as any of you who've been to my knowledge base know, that my perception is that even the darkest, most intense, most destructive energies can be can be measured out for the sake of evolution. It can be used. Anytime a big energy like anger or fear or even anxiety
Mm,
bubbles up to the surface, it's bringing with it quite a lot of energy. And this
mhm,
is the energy that we need to move mountains. That if a mountain doesn't need to be moved, that bubbling doesn't tend to happen. You know, if
mhm,
everything's groovy, then you just sit back and relax and you're in inner peace. Inner peace prevails. But when the anger comes up, it means something bigger needs to move. But the anger has to be understood as a tool, like a power tool,
mm,
like a fire. Back in the day, humanity didn't know how to make electricity go through the wires in the house, right? Fire was first discovered, it was quite destructive. But then we figured it out. Over time, we learned, like, how do you handle fire? And now we use that heat for everything. So it's the same thing, that it has to be recognize, like you said, you have to look, instead of going, oh, that person made me angry, or oh, that situation, you switch the perspective around. So we're looking inside
mm,
and we're saying, I'm feeling this power rising up in me and it's really intense and it wants to move a mountain.
mhm,
And I usually recommend people is to bring awareness into the heart center, because the heart center is a center of truth,
mhm,
and to find out, what is that mountain? What is that mountain that needs to move? What are we actually doing here? And I would propose to everybody who's listening that what we're really doing here is that we who see this truth are helping to guide our collective consciousness. Like if you have a room with a great big rock and 100 people and they're all pushing on the rock, it doesn't go anywhere. But if 10 people or 20 people decide, hey, let's just push it toward the door, then all of a sudden, no matter how many other people are pushing, that collective organization gets that rock moving.
mm,
So those of us who see this, are exercising through example
mhm,
how this process works for our dear, precious human collective who
mm,
has suffered. We don't even need to go into all that detail, over centuries, from the destructive effects of anger. And it comes forth with fine discrimination and measured regularity, that we go to the heart and we say, what is that mountain that needs to move? As soon as you turn around and you ask, what is that mountain that needs to move? The heat and discomfort of the anger dissolves and you're left with just the pure power to move the mountain.
mm,
And then that energy has to be carefully, and I'd say sensitively,
mhm,
presented to the collective in a way which allows everyone their dignity and stays focused on the task at hand. Like we keep that. And that's where you were talking, Andrew, about the original intention. So maybe we should look a little bit more at, you know, how intention really works. But
mhm,
that intention has to help guide the actions at the surface,
mhm,
so that as that fire comes out to the surface, it comes out in a way that's like a laser, that's specified, and it goes
mm,
right on the spot that needs to transform, and it helps give it the energy it needs to move to that, I would say, to evolve to an expression, a better, more complete, resolved expression of divinity. Because
mm,
those are what the mountains generally are. The mountains are places in our reality that have fallen behind cosmic evolution and have gotten out of alignment with our divine nature, and they need to come back.
mm. Beautiful. Yeah, it's interesting. We're just coming out of the festival of Navratri, and I was exploring. Maybe it was on Saturday. How what the story of Durga Ma and Mahisha really means. for us today here
Oh, do
in
share.
this context, you know.
Yeah.
And the way that I was looking at it is that basically mahisha surah is that aspect of our experience which represents these darker, denser layers of identification and misperception, and that every human being is the container for a mahishasura. It's that's present on our individual level, and of course that means that it's present on the collective level. And this represents this sort of mixture of a human-like form and a animal-like form, and animal-like tendencies that are mixed with pride and arrogance and uh, wanting, and all of these different movements that are really very self-centered in the lowest sense of the term. So acknowledging that we have that within our experience is very, very helpful. And that goes back to what I was saying about not seeing it out there.
Right.
It's really easy to say, look, how can people be so selfish? And look, I'm good. I give to charities and I do this and do that. But what differs among us is really the degree of the awareness of the Mahisha Sura within. So for some, it's very unconscious. For some, it's more conscious. For some, it's unconscious on the level of they don't know that there's another option. And so that's what's really expressing through them. For some, it's unconscious on the level of their not being aware that it's still there because they're at a different stage of evolution. But that really hasn't been resolved. It's been buried under different things. And in this story, which I'm not an expert in such things, but the way in which it was interpreted here is that basically the the understanding is that only the grace of the feminine has the power to really mm, resolve the Mahishasura. And in terms of like formless divinity, what this means is that the masculine aspect, which is just, just the pure silence of changeless awareness, won't do the trick on its own, because the Mahishasura has that boon that says, I can only be defeated by a woman. And hmm, also in terms of spiritual approach, that means that the masculine approach isn't going to work. Negation, uh, intellectualization,
For
all of those different things, suppression, whatever, thinking our way out of it. It has to be surrender and devotion and love and
I was
grace.
just thinking that
Yeah.
it's like the female aspect has this, like a mother, she
Hmm.
understands her children best. She, of all the people on earth, the mother understands the child best.
Yeah.
Like she understands the child understands themselves better than anybody else understands them. But the
Mm.
next person who understands them best is the mother. And so she has that level of refined perception that can bring the solution to the surface with so much compassion and empathy and grace that it effectively promotes the transformation required
Mm.
without damaging. And that's the whole thing about the anger, is that if the anger comes out in an unrefined manner, it explodes like a bomb and it just breaks everything in its path, even the good stuff.
Mm.
But if it comes out like a surgeon's scalpel, then it comes out with such care and such precision that like awareness, of the detail of the human body and exactly where the cut needs to be made, no more, no less, like that, then it comes out and it actually affects, can save a life. It saves lives, and they both destroy, right? The bomb destroys, the knife destroys. But in one case, the knife is destroying for the sake of saving the life. In the
Mm.
other case, the destruction is just making a mess.
Yes, yeah, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, so this understanding then lets us see that um, Durga is an aspect of our own divinity. So she represents this mm, reality of formless femininity, if you will. Mm. And it is through this that the mahisha surah that appears to have been running rampant on planet Earth is really going to be resolved.
It's going to evolve, right?
Yeah.
Like ultimately, everything is all life is aiming towards union with the divine.
It is, yes. And I think that one of the perspectives that I favor is that it's an opportunity for a demonstration of the power of God, a
Yeah.
demonstration of the power of divinity. And
Yeah.
so these things that seem to be really out of place or awful or whatever the case may be, whatever they're being called. Not that they're, to be romanticized or anything, but oftentimes they're just a blessing in disguise. And the blessing is that in the midst of that, there's the possibility that grace can overcome it, that we can come to know a more essential aspect of our truth through what appears to be the challenge on the surface level.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of lifting weights or something.
Mm,
Your arm can get strong if you do that some, but if you create a little tension or a little counterbalance, then the arm becomes strong much faster. And
mm,
that the negativity acts, it kind of like it sort of illuminates the exact aspect of divinity that's trying to surface by
mm,
showing its opposite,
mhm,
whatever that specific symptom is, or whatever that specific. That's why when I was looking at the COVID and the events of 2020, I was looking at this thing and I was thinking, what is it that divinity is trying to communicate to itself with this thing? And I thought, well, they all have heat in common, and
mm,
they're all such beautiful metaphors for the way we deal with anger collectively. And as we move forward into a better time for humanity, we want to leave this world with, you know, uh, we want to have an effect on our environment
mm,
that promotes a better quality of life for everyone as we move forward.
mm,
So part of that story is recognizing that particular aspect of Mahishasura, which is
mhm,
that anger aspect,
mhm,
and then understanding that its resolution comes in handling it with such delicacy
mhm,
and empathy and compassion to allow it to not destroy it, but have its place in creation as part of the evolutionary process.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think the point you made at the beginning is just so important, significant. I have to say it again here, which is that it all boils back down to being a little more introspective and self-reflective. And instead of when something comes up that creates, you have that reaction, that anger reaction, instead of blaming right away, to turn around and say, how is that experience shaping me? Like what is it actually doing for me? And so often what we see is the worst of situations will bring out the best in people. They will create the context for amazing growth in areas that would not have otherwise happened.
Mhm. Yeah. I feel like on a practical level, what this story represents and what we've been speaking about um, has the potential to show up as in our daily life is the willingness to open into the the reception of the light in areas where it hasn't been received. So if
Right. Oh,
we
beautiful.
recognize that the sun is always shining and we have these different blockages that appear to obscure the shining of the light. But when we are willing to really open in to that light touching it, then what begins to take place is that that is resolved, and then everything that was hiding underneath that comes up into the field of attention, and then that starts to resolve. And so we become aware of these deeper and deeper layers of unconscious material.
Yeah.
And through attentive allowing, through opening into the possibility that divinity can demonstrate through us the reality of glory and grace and supreme power and love, every single day, then what begins to take place is that we are full of light. We see that we are the light, and more light begins to dissolve the darkness, which really was never even there in the first place. It was just a misperception of the light within itself.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right, right. Yes, 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 I agree. I agree. It was there just long enough to get that facet of the light fully open, fully
Mhm.
blossomed open.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I was going to, you were saying it practically speaking, I really appreciate the way you express that, Andrew.
Mm.
That in my work, I connect with a lot of people who have uh, challenges, like illnesses or things, and it's not uncommon for a lot of people to come from backgrounds where things were harder when they were littler.
Mhm.
And one would think, yeah, why would it be that in a creation, any creation ever, that a little child would have to be subjected to a difficult or beginning, some abuse or some difficulties in their early years. And when a child is so small and they're so vulnerable and they don't have all the mental facilities all filled in yet and all that, mental, physical, whatever. But my experience is that often the people who've had the most difficult upbringings have have a tremendous facility to shift their awareness back inside,
Mm.
because when the outside is unspeakable, then the only refuge is inside,
Mm.
and it will cause the soul to cultivate that habit of referring back to the inner reality for answers, resources of energy, perspective, wisdom,
Mm.
even empathy. It helps people understand. So um, I'm not advocating for the mistreatment of children, but for by any means. But at the same time, I'm also saying this to help provide a perspective for anybody who might have had an experience like that when they were little, that rather than having that feeling of resentment, like, you know, once they get to be an adult, like, how could the adults have been so cruel and so broken, so wrong, but realize that we all choose the resistance that we need based on our inner strength. And even when a soul comes into this world very small, it can be that it's a very great soul. It's a very, very strong soul. And so it can happen that they find themselves going through their educational years or something in a dysfunctional family of some sort,
Mm.
only to emerge from that experience with a level of inner strength that would not have otherwise cultivated through that experience.
Mm. Yeah, the more darkness, or shadow that appears to be there, the more opportunity for the light to reveal itself. So it's just a matter of how we look at it, really. When I'm going to build a big fire, I want lots of firewood. And the more firewood that I have, the brighter the fire is going to appear to be.
Right.
Everything that, seems to be out of place impressions within our experience has the potential to be firewood for the fire of enlightenment, for the
Beautiful.
flames of devotion. And that is a very helpful perspective to hold.
I love it. I love this metaphor. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And especially relates to this topic of tonight's session, which is collective energy healing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we bring to the table, what each one of us, and I'm talking to the audience here, what each one of us brings to the table is that aspect of mahisha surah. Did I say the word right? Mahisha surah.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mahisha is
aspect of our own mahisha surah.
I think so. I don't know. You probably know better than I
I
do. No, I'm
don't
just
because I'm
kidding.
not that familiar with it. But yeah, that we bring a lot of times when we do group healings, there's like one, like when I hold my live webinars, I'm the one who's got the microphone and the camera's on me, and everybody, we're all doing it together, but most of the other people that are doing it are at varying degrees of investment. We could say some people are just sitting in their pajamas eating their dinner, kind of,
Mhm.
it's this entertainment, and
Right.
other people are like, meditating while we're doing. There's all different range of different levels of investment. But I think a lot of people will think, well, that's just not something that I can do because I don't have the camera and the microphone, or I don't have the years of meditation or whatever. But that's actually not true, because every one of us has this fuel, has
Yes.
this fuel for the fire,
Mhm.
and everybody's fuel counts. And also, the other thing is, every human being is an expert at focusing attention. And it
Mm.
doesn't matter if you've been on a lifetime spiritual path, or if you've never really thought about being on a spiritual path, or anything. Like, we're just all really, humans are just good at focusing attention.
Mhm.
So when we get together as a group and we focus our attention collectively, know that anything that you may possess that you think, oh man, this is my deep dark secret, I don't want anyone else in the group to know about that, like, actually that could be the precise key that we need to unlock the door of that collective potential, which is what we're working on when
Mm.
we're doing group energy healing. You know, that exact thing that you felt so embarrassed about, or don't ever talk to others about, or whatever, that, like, that's the thing that when that comes in to play, it's like the magic,
Yeah.
that brings out that quality, that quality of divinity that was outside the range of everyone's
Mhm.
perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, the darker and the denser the coal, the hotter it burns. And so, we think like, "Oh, it's gonna be great when I don't have to get close to this stuff."
Right.
But really we can see the intelligence of this in such a way that we are just hungry for deep, dark pieces of coal,
Right.
because it's not an issue anymore. It's not my problem, and I think that feeling like it's my problem or feeling like it's my issue is coal, so that sense of false identification is a part of what has the potential to be brightly burning fuel in this fire. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add to that when you're saying my problem, what what you're really saying is my individual problem, as an
Yeah,
individual, as a, like, identifying with just this body in this life,
correct. Yeah.
but realizing that anything that's like that deep inside the soul or deep inside the heart, it's actually, it has a reality in the collective as well. And
Hmm.
that as the individual heart heals, the collective also heals.
Yes.
So it's as if we're taking care of the problem for ourselves, but we're also taking care of the problem for the collective.
Hmm.
And that, I would also like to say that includes, I would say, unconstrained by space and time. Because a lot of times what we carry in our hearts, it's really the deep stuff, is often inherited or is something that has been prevalent in the uh, cultural conditioning of our environment for a really long time. So, like this anger thing, how many centuries have people been cruel to each other, and justified it? Well, here, make me mad, or whatever,
Yeah.
you know. Uh, so,
Yeah.
as it heals here, it heals through space and time. And we have this responsibility and privilege at
Hmm.
this time of humanity with our internet that makes us all nicely connected, um, to actually take on or to find those dark, dense pieces of coal that were never really fully cleanly resolved in the
Hmm.
past. I could name off names of past events, but I think everybody can think of them on
Sure.
their own, various wars and so forth,
Hmm.
where the pain of that war is still sitting in the collective consciousness, the
Yeah.
memories of the pain. I mean, the memory of slavery in
Mm.
America, right? I don't need to even say more about that, but
Yeah.
it's still trying to resolve now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of that stuff there, and I think that there we can be intentional about it,
Yeah,
and but at the same time, whether we're intentional about it or not, you know, we're walking along and we see something on the side of the road, or we're watching a movie, it's going to be reflected up into our awareness, and then what happens then? And that's really where the rubber meets the road. Every single day, the conscious experiencing that appears as humanity is encountering unresolved material. And
right.
the thing that appears to differ between us is whether or not we see that that's going on, and the way in which we are with that when
Yeah,
it arises.
beautiful. Beautiful, beautifully put, Andrew. Yeah, I think that essentially like sums up this this point that's coming up for this thing, is that element of conscious recognition
Hmm.
and intelligent, or I'd say, uh, yeah, and like an intelligent express. No, wait, it's okay. I might have to cut that part. But conscious recognition and intentional self interaction
Mm,
with that energy or with that experience.
yeah.
When it comes up, it really, and realizing, recognizing, it comes up as my inner experience. It
Mm,
looks like it's being coming from the outside, but that outside reflection is just activating it's reminding me that this energy is not resolved yet. And
exactly.
so the resolution then comes from the dynamic interaction um, of that primary distinction. Is that right?
Mm. Yeah, that's a part of it. I think that the factors are grace, willingness, mm, the attentive allowing of what arises, and in terms of the primary distinction between the masculine and the feminine, we can see that allowingness as an expression of the feminine, that attentive allowingness. And that's supported by this sort of pure witnessing of changeless awareness that allows for that to be seen arising, and then also to be seen in its being allowed.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, for everybody watching, that awareness of the changeless, qualityless ocean of inner silence is a direct experience. And if you're not certain how to access that, Andrew has courses where he helps guide people into that experience. I've got a blog on my knowledge base. You can go look there. It's not a long thing, but it kind of gives you an overview. It's called the 112 point matrix.
Mm.
And if you search my knowledge base alphabetically, it will be the first entry because it starts with a number. And yeah, there are the potential of human awareness is to be able to directly access and experience that changeless, qualityless, eternal, unbounded, infinite source of all that is.
Yes.
And even if it's something you're not sure you've ever experienced it's fear not, because it is the birthright of everyone to have that experience. So only wanting it is all you need. And then you'll find that coming up in the environment everywhere.
Mm. Yeah, actually, everyone that's watching, if they can just tune into a simplicity and an innocent openness right here, this pure, changeless, silent stillness is closer than your very breath. It is familiarity itself. You need not look very far.
So sweet. It's between the breaths, between the thoughts, between the states of consciousness. So between waking, dreaming, and sleeping. It is the closest thing to awareness because it's awareness itself. It's just that it's so close, it's like it slips under the radar.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So once you know that that's what you're looking for, then it's like, oh, it's just everywhere. It's just everything.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Beautiful, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you for taking
Thank
that
you.
moment and just realizing, well, why not to help recreate that experience for everyone? So
Mm.
beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So I think with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today for this little discussion on collective energy healing. It was for both Andrew and I, it's kind of exciting to go into the mechanics of that with all of you because usually we're just doing it, but it's kind of fun to share the inside story, you know? It's kind of fun to go look behind the curtain and see how the details of that actually play out and how we can share this level, this deep, beautiful level of inner reality, and use that commonality of consciousness to support the creation of a level of experience for everyone that's really worth living,
Mm.
a life worth living. So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll
you
look
all.
forward to seeing you next time. Be
Mm.
sure to like and subscribe if you
Mhm.
like the content of this session, and we'll hoping to have you join us again. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Bye.